Hi, I'm Tim Donner along with Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Graham Noble, and John Claude. And this is the Conservative Five, an online TV production of Liberty Nation News. President Donald Trump celebrated the first 100 days of his second administration with a rally in Macomb County, Michigan. Of course, a classic swing state. From tariffs to deportations to kneecapping universities condoning violence against Jews, it has been what we might call an e-ticket to ride for those over 4 feet tall.
As you know, this week marks the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. And President Trump's first 100 days have undoubtedly been the most monumental and historic of any administration in American history. President Trump has already delivered on hundreds of promises he made to the American people, and we will continue to talk about all of them throughout this week.
Graham, before we start with the accolades for the first 100 days of President Trump, let's talk about the other direction, about some of the maybe confusing actions and consequences of Donald Trump's first 100 days.
You know, it's difficult to say because it is, 100 days. It's not like we're a year or a year and a half, 2 years into this presidency, and some things take a long time. And, any administration is kind of like, a super tanker at sea. Once that administration is gone and the next administration takes over, it takes a while to turn around that massive vessel, and go in an opposite direction, especially what Trump is doing. He's going in the absolute opposite direction in every way to what the Biden administration was doing. So, perhaps it's easy to be impatient about things, but I think there's kind of been a few gray areas, if you like, if you don't want to use the term black marks, but certainly gray areas. I think obviously the tariffs is the number one thing that's been causing heartburn, and perhaps that's a lot due to the negative press that the tariffs have been getting, which is kind of making people jumpy about the future of the economy. But nevertheless, I know Trump tries to use these tariffs as a kind of a weapon and kind of leverage, but at the same time, threatening to impose tariffs and then suddenly saying, well, we're delaying the implementation of this set of tariffs for a little while longer. It does kind of cause somewhat confusing atmosphere, and I don't necessarily think that's a good thing for the country in general. Other than that, I think the signal gate thing with the Department of Defense was definitely an unforced error, luckily the consequences of it in terms of real world results were not bad, but that could have been an issue. I mean, I really think that, somebody should, I don't know if anyone's been held accountable for that, but somebody should be, because someone really messed up somewhere along the line with that whole thing. Really, obviously, if you were speaking to someone from the other side of the political spectrum, they would be coming out with a list. They'd need a lot more than 2 minutes to go through all of the things that have gone wrong, but, or in their minds have gone wrong. But I think generally there's the confusion about whether or not agencies are going as well. For instance, the Department of Education. Well, is it going or is it not? Because it still seems to be here, whether it's been scaled back or not. So I think in general, Trump has been maybe possibly not completely following through yet on all of his promises. He's kind of partially lived up to some promises, but not all the way yet. And I think some people, even Trump supporters, they're probably happy, but at the same time, over one or two things, they're probably still scratching their head and saying, well, are we going to do this or are we not going to do it?
It almost seems sometimes like Donald Trump is conducting a negotiation in a meeting room. No, conducting the art of the deal by giving and taking and keeping people off balance. But he's not in a meeting room. He's doing it in public. And I think it's a lot harder for people to understand the hardball tactics that he does use to try and get a good final deal.
Yeah,
Now,
well, and I just jump in real quick, Tim, and say this, that in a way, yeah, from what you said, is what Trump is kind of doing. It's almost like he's doing politics in public and in real time, and the American public are not used to that, because usually that's not the way presidents operate.
also, there's been a level of transparency we've never seen before, in the sense that you really see Trump on average twice a day making announcements and taking questions, which is a big contrast from the Joe Biden administration. And speaking of that, Mr. Clark, John Clark, in the Biden administration, the cabinet was largely invisible. It was all about Biden and his inner circle. But now Trump has a very activist cabinet that is very present in the media day after day. So what do you make after 100 days of Trump's cabinet selection?
Well, I do think that's been perhaps one of his weak spots, as Graham correctly points out. The appearance of being equivocal on things like tariffs has certainly created a feeding frenzy in the press, but so has Signalgate. And amongst his cabinet members, the weak point, and as Graham hints, maybe if a head needs to roll, Pete Hegseth's head will be rolling. That could be in the works. The odds, if you look at the betting markets, have increased that he will be dismissed. Now, no Secretary of Defense has been this unpopular since the notorious Donald Rumsfeld, where a lot of people look to is CNN's Harry Enton, the pollster. And he pointed out that Donald Trump is down minus 5 points right now, but that Pete Hegseth is down 14, and that he is really a drag on this president and really is a headache. And so I think there is concern. And I think, by the way, it's part of the whole feeding frenzy of the mainstream media that they abhor anything this president does. They're looking for failure. They want the price of eggs to go up. They want war in Russia. They want conflict. They wanted to fail so badly that they seem to be praying for their own hardship. And that infests the way they look at Pam Bondi, the way they look at Brooke Rollins, the way they look, all of his cabinet picks are all under heightened scrutiny by a very critical press, which was, I think, more conciliatory in the Biden era. So Hegseth has to keep his game up that much the more, and the Signal app may mean that the crowds are calling for a sacrifice.
In baseball, they say that if you hire a rookie manager who's never managed at the major league level before, the thing you need to do is hire a bench coach, a lieutenant who's a grizzled veteran who can sort of impart wisdom on the rookie at the top of the scale. And perhaps that's really what Hegseth needs and has not yet been able to find. So, Andrew, let's talk about 100 days of the economy. How is the United States of America doing?
Well, the U.S. labor market is holding steady despite all the negative prognostications that DOGE is going to lead to all these massive layoffs and tariffs lead to massive layoffs. Before this recording, the first quarter GDP came out, and it showed the first contraction in the U.S. economy since the first quarter of 2022. But other numbers are flashing red. You look at ADP's private payrolls report, it showed that just 62,000 jobs were created. So in economics, you have a lagging effect. So with the administration's policy changes, it could take time. I think Graham alluded to this. It could take time to appear in the broader and hard economic data. But I'm going to say one thing, though, about tariffs. And of course, I know a lot of Trump supporters, they love tariffs. But it has backfired tremendously on the administration. I'm going to say one name here, Scott Bessent. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he has been the rock in this administration. He has kept things together. In February, he said that no longer will Donald Trump and the White House care what Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says anymore. He doesn't care what they do because they're going to focus on the 10-year yield. Okay, so that's what they're doing. They employ all these policies hoping to bring down the 10-year yield. Then April 2nd comes along, Liberation Day. The Treasury yields tank. They fall to about 3.8%. Then in the coming days, a complete reversal. It goes as high as 4.6%, completely backfiring. And then Kevin Hassett, he's one of the top economic advisors. He was on, I think it was CNBC, and he said that the spike in Treasury yield forced the administration to take an early pivot on the reciprocal tariffs. That shows right there is that they did not anticipate the backfire that would occur from the reciprocal tariffs or the universal baseline tariffs. And now you're constantly having every day confusion. You don't know what you're talking about. There was a press call recently about Trump providing exemptions or relief to the auto tariffs. And that call, nobody had any clue what they were talking about. Everyone was all over the place with the steel aluminum tariffs, auto tariffs, reimbursements. Reporters had no clue what was going on. So the administration, I think, is going day by day and just tergiversating on all these different policies. And the interest rate movements, and now Trump doubling down now and ratcheting up his pressure campaign on the Fed, I think is an indictment of that suspicion.
Well, as Donald Trump said, the effect of his tariff regime is going to be long-term, not short-term, and we've certainly seen evidence of that so far. So, Dave, let's turn to you. No peace between Ukraine and Russia, and that's taking its toll, too, because Trump promised to have that war ended on day one. I think people knew he was exaggerating, but whatever. The optics are becoming increasingly troublesome for the administration, are they not?
Yes, they are, except that, you had the 15 minutes of focused conversation in the Vatican at Pope Francis' funeral, which was more important as the photo op than anything substantive, really. But real progress has proven elusive, unfortunately, and frustration with Putin is growing day to day, and especially when there isn't some solid evidence that a ceasefire is imminent or even possible. The sticking points have not changed. What to do with illegally annexed Crimea and territory Russian troops occupy and Ukrainian forces are not dislodging. The Donetsk, Luhansk, the Zaporizhia and Kherson, all held by Russia. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff have been in talks with Russians. This last week, Witkoff traveled to Moscow on April 24th for discussions on the 25th, and he was talking with Putin directly. And following the meeting, between Witkoff and Putin, Kremlin aide Yuri Yushakov characterized the discussion as constructive and very useful. Now, Putin says he wants a 72-hour ceasefire, May 8th through the 10th, to commemorate the end of World War II. Now, honestly, Ukraine doesn't believe the ceasefire pledge, and they cite the 3,000 violations during the Easter 2025 truce. Most of those watching the situation believe Putin's offers of a ceasefire are just posturing to give the impression that he seeks peace when his troops are actually maintaining military pressure. Still, I think, Trump has expressed strong displeasure with Putin and is clearly not reluctant to place secondary sanctions on Russia if there's no progress. So no breakthrough is imminent, a lot of frustration.
Well, one thing is certain about Donald Trump's first 100 days is that the next 100 days are also certain to be a barn burner. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, panel. So that's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. Now, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I'm your host, Tim Donner, filling in for Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for the latest news and commentary. Your choice for free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.